Good evening, folks. Ariel over here at Plymouth, where I want to do a little garden update. I forget even when the last one was that I had done. I think it was like midsummer. To recap, if you weren't following all of that, the garden got started very late due to moving everything this spring. And then when you last saw it, most things were really struggling due to the extreme heat, which we've actually continued to have, despite the fact that you do see the garden pretty much covered with frost covers right now. And we have had several very hard freezes. Well, it's been freezing or frosting almost every night now for a couple weeks, but it has continued to get, last couple days were cooler, only into the 70s, which is more normal summer weather. But up until then, we were having hard freeze, 90 degrees, hard freeze, 90 degrees. So the weather has continued to be kind of stressful for the plants. And I have had, every now and then there's been a warmer spell where I leave the covers off, but I've pretty much had them covered for a couple weeks now. Then when I have to, take the covers off to pick peas, water, something like that. But I wanted to just share a little bit about how things are doing now, because some of them are looking a little better than the last time you saw them. So let's check out this first bed right here, which is peas. If you guys have any questions about the frost cover setups themselves, I've done several videos on how I've done this, and I've used it for 6-7 years now, and I like it. As you can see, it's relatively easy to open, even just with one person, even for a bed this long. So anyway, this bed is peas and carrots, actually. And the carrots, I've had the poorest germination that I ever had. I usually get phenomenal carrots. They do tend to like really cool and damp weather, and I think because I got them planted so late and the weather was so hot, that hurt them. But the ones that are growing, the ones that came up, are now doing pretty well. There's some are smaller and some are getting pretty sizable. Let's pull one and take a look at it. I don't remember which variety I have where without looking at my little map. So there's a good example. I've got some like that. That's respectable. That's not a huge carrot. They're going to do some more growing. Carrots can definitely take freezes and frosts, and they actually get sweeter as it gets cooler. So I pull some to eat, but I don't usually pull the bulk of them out of the ground until after a bunch of freezes, usually when I think the ground is going to freeze solid and not thaw again until spring. So I've got some carrots. After all, for a while there I wasn't sure if I'd get any, so I'm pretty pleased with that. And the peas have done really well. I've got 3 varieties here. You can kind of see the tallest ones have gotten a bit squished by the covers, but there's a shorter variety, a taller, and a shorter again. And they all bloomed away, got loads of peas. I picked maybe close to 15 gallons of whole peas. Now these are ones designed to shell, where the shell is tough. So that wasn't 15 gallons of peas to eat, but across several pickings, and then they were kind of down to just the last few. And let me see if I can find a good example. There's one. When we got a really hard freeze, they were covered, but I think it was in the low 20s. And let me see if I can show the camera this. Do you see how those pea shells, the hulls, got frozen looking? It got cold enough, even though they were covered, for the shells to freeze under there. It did not hurt the plant, and it did not hurt the peas inside. I'm just shelling these out quick. These weren't quite fully mature, but if you can see that the peas if I don't drop them, the peas inside were not frozen. In fact, they're delicious, but it got just cold enough, even under the frost covers, to freeze the hulls. But there was kind of just the last few, and we figured the crop was pretty much done anyway, so I wasn't too worried about it. Now, as you can probably see, there are blossoms all over again. This is like a full second crop that, if they have time to mature, that looks like I might get, because each of these branches has, 2, 3, 5, 6, new blossoms coming out. So we'll see. In a few days, we've got a forecast for some snow and very low temperatures. So I don't know if they'll survive that, but either way, even if I don't get another pea off of them at all, been very, very happy with that harvest, especially considering how the rest of the garden did. Oh, and if you're curious about these guys over here, these are sunflowers. Actually not planted by me, though I planned to plant some. I had a bird feeder hanging right here. It's no longer there because the birds spilled a few sunflower seeds that grew, and they got so tall they, you know, kind of knocked the feeder off of its perch. But they've been blooming. Some of the foliage has frozen a little bit. They're still sending out some new blossoms, and these heaviest heads that are hanging down now look like they might have a chance of making mature seeds. Again, with, you know, a hard freeze and some snow on the way, I don't know if I'll get any mature enough seeds to like feed to a bird or the chicken. We'll see. This big head was the very first one that opened, so if anything's gonna actually make one, it'd probably be that guy. But it's been cool. They've been beautiful, blooming away, and hopefully next year I will actually get some planted myself in a timely fashion instead of just waiting for the birds to do it for me, and get to enjoy them longer and maybe get some more mature seed off of them. But they've been really pretty, even though they're looking a little frost burnt now. Okay, the cabbages were another thing that had a really rough start. They like cool weather, and we didn't have that like normal. And plants that are already stressed tend to have more issues with disease and pests. And if you look at, say, this guy right here in the middle, you can see these lower, older leaves, and how they look really not healthy. These were the ones that got really eaten up by some variety of flea beetle. Some were a lot worse than that. And I actually thought all the cabbages might die at that point. They got so demolished. The leaves just turned into looking like lace from all the holes. As cooler weather has started to come, at least the nights have been much cooler, you can see that a lot of new leaves have grown out. Like those, you know, those older leaves are about that level, so everything from here up has grown out since then. There's a little cabbage worm right on that leaf. He's not big enough to do a whole lot of damage, but that's what a baby cabbage worm looks like. Come from a little moth. They eat cabbage. Diatomaceous earth, or DE, will easily get rid of those if you have a bunch. But again, I've only really had them attack unhealthy, struggling plants, which mine certainly are this year. But anyhow, in the center now of some of these are purple cabbages. They are starting to form very small heads. They're still pretty small. Purple cabbage always tends to have smaller heads than the green varieties, so that's not surprising. But they are growing out, so I might get some little heads, and we're going to go and look over there because a few of the green ones are looking even better. So over here, the green heads are certainly not impressive. Normally I have enough cabbage growth that by, you know, a long time earlier in the summer, they're fully touching each other and there's none of this bare ground. But as you can see, especially like this guy, this one here, they're starting to make pretty decent firm heads. Now last year, I had cabbage heads about this big. I don't see any way I'm going to get that, but if I get a whole bunch this size, that's way better than nothing. So I'm happy with that. Strawberries are done producing. If you're not familiar with that, they're usually a spring crop most places, which makes them kind of through the middle of summer here. But their foliage is starting to turn its fall colors, which is beautiful. They've made tons and tons of new runners. I want to cut a few of those here shortly to transplant some more strawberries for us, and I have a friend who wants some more as well. But if you're not familiar with how strawberries reproduce, they grow these things called runners. Let me see if I can separate one. So off the parent plant, it sent this little thing right here will turn into a new plant. Right now it's starting to send little roots down here. If I clipped it here and here, and stuck it in some moist dirt and kept it at least a little bit damp till it could send out its own roots, that would make it. But that's only the first runner. Then it's sent out to here and branched again. This one's almost big enough to root, and it's already starting on another one here, and if this keeps going, it'll send another one here, and so on. So you can see how many new strawberry plants you could get in a year with, you know, very little trouble at all. Here's a good example. See how that guy's already got longer roots, and they're looking dry because they're out in the air. They're still looking for soil, but if I put him in soil, that would grow out pretty quickly. So anyway, that's a little bit about strawberry reproduction, but This is the only bed I'm not covering. Strawberry leaves are very, very cold hardy, and they just need to prepare for it to be winter, so this is not staying covered, and they're just doing their thing, working at going dormant for the year. This bed is another one that really surprised me. This has two things in it. Now, originally it just had broccoli, and they, just like the cabbages, got completely beat up. Some of their leaves are an even better example. Check out how eaten up and terrible that looks. And I thought they were going to do nothing. The flower head, the part of a broccoli you usually eat, that was forming, had all been chewed by the same beetles as well. They just look pathetic. I really thought they were going to die, but they've surprised me. I just the other day trimmed off those, chewed up heads, but they have been sending out these shoots. I need to pick them again off to the side. It look like these. These aren't big heads, but there's a whole ton of them, and we've, eaten a bunch already of these little secondary florets that they usually produce every year, but I was amazed they managed to grow out of that stress and still do that. In the meantime, because I thought they were going to die, in between I put these zucchinis, because a friend had some extra transplants they didn't have space for in their garden, and they've been growing. Back over here I've got one little zucchini that's like about the size of my thumb right now. That's all the bigger it's gotten. A bunch are blooming. There's some more, there's one like this, half the size of my pinky finger. So if they don't all die, they will be covered, but if they don't all die in the harder freeze we're expecting, I might get a decent handful of zucchini yet before the year is over. But originally I put them in there because I thought the broccoli was all going to die. And it's kind of that way through the whole bed. The other end has some cauliflower, which looked about as pathetic as the broccoli, and is also trying to grow out, and then a few Brussels sprouts on the end, kind of the same thing. So that was surprising. The onion bed is again trying to grow out. I'm not going to get a spectacular harvest of giant onions this big like I did last year. The variety on this end seemed to get really stressed. They've kind of formed a bulb and died back, so they're not going to do anything else. But all the rest of these are working at making, decent bulbs. So again, I'm going to get something, and for a while I thought I was going to get nothing from that, so that's encouraging. The lettuces are something I can generally rely on doing really well. This is one of my smallest beds. The reason I put lettuce here is because it helps me have self-control and not plant too much, because as you can see, even so, we cannot keep up with eating all the lettuce that's produced. And I love growing all the different varieties and colors and textures and mixing them together. So I've got dark spiky leaves, rose blush leaves, dark crinkle leaves, butter crunches, another different kind of blush, and so on. But the lettuce has done very well, and we've eaten a bunch, and obviously we could eat a whole lot more. This bed is one that's still not looking so great. Most of it is beets, different varieties, and a lot of them have just kind of been sitting here. They're starting to make very small beets, but there's not a whole lot. And then there's a random one that's just decided to get huge, like that fellow right there. Why is he 10 times bigger than everyone else, and there's a few of them scattered through here? I don't know, but there is a couple of those. I'm gonna get at least some beets. In the center here was cucumbers, or is cucumbers. I haven't picked any cucumbers yet, but there's a little tiny guy right there. There's a few like that. I'm actually gonna let him get back on the ground, because that's why he looks that good, because most of these, if you can see over to here, they got frost burnt and their leaves turned all crispy and dead. And again, that was that really cold night a couple weeks ago when they got frozen even through the frost covers. These covers provide about 10 degrees of protection, so I can go down to about 22 degrees in general before stuff like that happens. So it's a little bit colder than that to do those in. So I'll probably only get, one meal of tiny cucumbers this year, but that is fairly expected. Trying to grow cucumbers here, because they are a warm weather crop and they like the heat, is usually unreliable for me. But I really like fresh cucumbers, so every year I try a few just in case they do well. The green beans are kind of like the peas in that they've done better than normal for me this year. They're usually more like cucumbers in that I plant them because I like them, but because they like warmer weather, I don't reliably get a good harvest. But you can see how, tall some of these vined up. Now they're missing a lot of leaves because, again, they got burnt in that frost even through the covers, and so the top leaves have started to fall off. There's still some little beans forming under there, so I'm keeping them covered. I've gotten quite a few good meals of green beans off here. Well, I say green, but some are yellow, some are green, and some are purple. So I've been very happy with that. I would guess I'll probably completely lose the plants in a few days, but until then, they've been fairly productive, and so that was another, more successful than expected part of the garden this year. It's not actually in one of the garden beds, but right beside it, all those ferny looking fronds are asparagus, and you can kind of see how they're starting to develop gold tints in them. They're like the strawberries starting to die back, for the autumn and store their energy down in their roots for the winter, and they can send back up new shoots in the spring. And then the other two big long beds are potatoes. And again, they're not looking very well. With my hand here, you can kind of see the scale. They are usually at this time of year, this tall, completely bushed out, no bare ground visible. They got about this size a couple weeks after planting, and then they really have just kind of sat here ever since. They do seem to be sending out a couple newer leaves now, like on that plant. They just haven't been happy. Once they actually freeze and all the tops look dead, I will dig under there and see what's under there. And I suspect there's some potatoes under there, but if I was guessing, I would guess I might have a bunch of potatoes this size and not any, this size. But that's going to be a mystery till I actually dig some up. So that's a little update on how the garden's doing. As I mentioned, their forecast, if it's right, in a few days we're going to have a day with, probably temperatures in the teens and some snow, and that may put an end to all the rest of this pretty rapidly. But if not, well, even then I'll, pull the beets, onions, carrots, potatoes, whatever I've got there. I will cut all the cabbage heads, even though it won't be a lot. And I've already gotten a good many peas and green beans and lettuce. So not a total flop, but even when you've been gardening for lots of years, you can definitely have things go on that just make it not a good year. It's far from the harvest I had last year, but that's probably one of the things about being a gardener. You always have to be kind of optimistic and planning ahead, because I'm hoping for next year. And I did want to mention that in the meantime, I have run a soil mineral analysis on this soil, because I could kind of tell by looking at the plants, in addition to being planted late in the heat, they were probably struggling with some mineral deficiencies. I do have I'm not sure how it's properly pronounced, calcareous soil. Just in brief, that means there's tons of calcium in it. Like if you pour some vinegar on it, it'll fizz and bubble and explode like a little volcano, which throws the pH off kind of, and the plant's ability to therefore absorb a lot of the other nutrients. So I've got some plans to help fix that this fall, kind of once everything dies back, as I go to putting the garden to bed for the year. I will be adding a bunch of compost, which I've got 2 big piles, composting down right now. Hopefully I'll be able to add that. I've got a friend who's got some horse manure they need to get rid of, so we're going to put a layer of some of that on top because the soil definitely needs some additional organic matter. And then I have a few of the recommended mineral amendments, which are often very small amounts of, some things like zinc, etc. I'll try to get that all layered actually under the compost, above the soil, under the compost. So the earthworms and such, which I do have plenty of, should help digest that all and mix it through and such. And hopefully that, combined with planting in a timely fashion and hoping for more normal weather next spring, will give us a much better harvest. So that's where we're at now and the plans for next year. Over here at Fineth, thank you so much for watching these videos and spending some of your very valuable time choosing to do that. We hope you found something that was useful, educational, helpful, maybe save someone else some time and trouble, or just something just plain beautiful. If you don't want to miss any videos, subscribe and hit the bell. And thanks for coming along on our journey as we build a new little homestead with our tiny house and everything to come.